I was signing away my house to my son when my granddaughter screamed, "Don't do it, Gran. They're gonna throw you out." Let me tell you something, honey. When you've spent 68 years building a life, raising children, working 3 jobs to put food on the table, and finally owning the roof over your head, the last thing you expect is for your own flesh and blood to stab you in the back. But that's exactly what happened to me on that Tuesday afternoon in March. My name is Marion Thompson, and for the past 3 decades, I've been the rock of my family. When Darnell's father walked out on us when he was just 8 years old, I didn't crumble. I worked the night shift at the hospital, cleaned houses during the day, and took in laundry on weekends. Every penny went into that boy's education, his clothes, his future. I thought I was building something beautiful. But here's the thing about trust, sweetheart. It's like building a house on sand. You can lay the strongest foundation, use the finest materials, but if the ground underneath is rotten, everything you've built will crumble when the storm comes. That afternoon, I was sitting in the fancy Italian restaurant downtown, the one Darnell insisted we meet at. He said it was more professional for signing legal documents. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when he picked a place where all the other diners could see what was happening. He wanted witnesses. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had all the papers spread out on the white tablecloth. The deed transfer documents, the power of attorney forms, everything needed to put my house in Darnell's name. He'd been asking for this for months, saying it would protect me from estate taxes and make things easier for the family. "You're getting older, Mama," he'd say with that charming smile that used to melt my heart. "Let me handle the financial stuff so you don't have to worry about it." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? This was my baby boy, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. The man who called me every Sunday, who brought me groceries, who promised to take care of me in my golden years. But here's what I didn't know. While I was sitting there, pen in hand, ready to sign away the only real security I'd ever had, Darnell had been systematically draining my bank account for the past 8 months. Small withdrawals here and there, amounts I wouldn't notice. $50 for gas money, $100 for emergency car repairs, $200 for Aaliyah's school supplies. I thought he was helping me manage my finances. Turns out he was robbing me blind. And Veronica? That woman I welcomed into my family with open arms? She wasn't just complicit in this betrayal. She was the mastermind. While I was teaching her my grandmother's cornbread recipe, she was researching nursing homes. While I was babysitting their children, she was looking up property values in my neighborhood. While I was praying for their marriage to succeed, she was planning my financial ruin. The restaurant was packed that day. Business lunches, anniversary dinners, people celebrating life's milestones. I remember thinking how ironic it was that I was sitting there, about to give away everything I'd worked for, while all around me people were building their futures. Mr. Henderson was explaining the legal implications of the transfer when I heard the commotion at the entrance. My 8-year-old granddaughter, Aaliyah, came running through the restaurant, tears streaming down her face, her little legs pumping as fast as they could go. "Grandma, Grandma," she was screaming, drawing attention from every table in the place. Darnell's face went white. Veronica reached for her purse, probably looking for some excuse to get up and leave. But Aaliyah was too fast. She threw herself into my arms, sobbing so hard she could barely catch her breath. "Don't sign it, Grandma," she whispered into my ear. "Daddy and Mommy are going to sell the house and put you in a nursing home. I heard them talking last night. They said you're too old to take care of yourself anymore." The room went silent. Every eye in that restaurant was on us. Mr. Henderson's pen stopped midair. Darnell was staring at his daughter, like she'd just spoken in tongues. Veronica was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. But me? I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not betrayal, not even sadness. I felt free. Because in that moment, I realized I'd been living a lie. My son didn't love me. He'd been using me. And now, finally, I had the truth. I looked at Darnell across that table, and for the first time in his life, I saw him clearly. Not as my precious baby boy, but as the stranger he'd become. A man capable of planning his own mother's financial destruction while smiling in her face. "Aaliyah," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Tell Grandma exactly what you heard." And that's when everything changed. My 8-year-old granddaughter played me a recording that made my blood run cold. My own son was planning my funeral while I was still alive. Aaliyah clung to me like I was her lifeline, and in that moment, I realized she was mine too. That little girl had just saved me from the biggest mistake of my life, and she didn't even know it yet. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I have something to show you." She reached into her backpack and pulled out her tablet. "Now, let me tell you something about children. They're smarter than we give them credit for." Aaliyah had been recording her parents' conversations for weeks, not because she was trying to be sneaky, but because she wanted to understand why Daddy was always so angry at Mommy about money. The first recording made my stomach drop. It was Darnell and Veronica talking in their bedroom, thinking Aaliyah was asleep. But that child had hidden her tablet under her bed, and it caught everything. "I don't care how long it takes." Darnell's voice came through clearly. "We're getting that house, and we're getting it cheap. Mama's too old to fight us legally." "Are you sure she won't suspect anything?" Veronica asked. "Please," Darnell laughed. "She's been trusting me with her money for years. I've been taking small amounts here and there, and she never notices. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. All those times Darnell had offered to help me with my banking, all those emergency withdrawals he'd made on my behalf, all those promises that he was just protecting me from financial scams. He'd been robbing me the whole time. But it got worse. The next recording was from just 2 nights ago. "We need to speed this up," Veronica said. "Your mother's getting suspicious. I saw her looking at her bank statements the other day." "So what? What's she gonna do about it?" "She's 70 years old. Who's gonna believe her over us? Still, we should have a backup plan. What if she refuses to sign the house over?" There was a pause, and then Veronica's voice dropped to a whisper that made my skin crawl. "What if something happened to her before she could change her will? An accident, maybe?" I almost dropped the tablet. My own son's wife was suggesting that something should happen to me. And Darnell's response? "Don't be stupid. We don't need to do anything drastic. Mama's already sick. She's got that heart condition. All we need to do is wait." "Wait for what?" "Wait for me to die so they could inherit everything without having to trick me into signing it over?" But the worst part was yet to come. The final recording was from yesterday, right before they left for the restaurant. "After we get the house," Darnell said, "we're selling it immediately. The market's hot right now. We could get almost $500,000 for it." "And what about your mother?" Veronica asked. "What about her? She'll have to figure something out. Maybe she can move in with Simone. Your sister won't take her. She's got her own problems. Then she can go to one of those assisted living places. They're not that expensive if you shop around." I sat there in that restaurant, surrounded by strangers, listening to my own son plan my exile to a nursing home while he pocketed the money from my house. The house I'd worked 30 years to pay off. The house where I'd raised him, where I'd nursed him through chicken pox and broken hearts, where I'd taught him to tie his shoes and drive a car. "Grandma?" Aaliyah's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you okay? You look like you're going to be sick." I wasn't sick. I was furious. But more than that, I was heartbroken. Because in that moment, I realized that the child I'd raised, the man I'd trusted with my life, had been a stranger to me for years. I'd been living with a predator in my own family, and I'd never seen it coming. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. Put those papers away. We're not signing anything today. Darnell's face went from white to red in seconds. Mama, don't be ridiculous. Aaliyah's just a child. She doesn't understand what she heard. Oh, I think she understands perfectly, I said, standing up and gathering my things. And I think you understand perfectly too. You've been stealing from me for months, and now you want to steal my house. Well, it's not happening. The other diners were staring at us now. I could see the waitstaff whispering to each other. This was exactly the kind of family drama that made people put down their forks and watch. Mama, you're embarrassing yourself, Darnell hissed. Sit down, and let's finish this like adults. Like adults? I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. You want to talk about acting like adults? How about we start with you returning the thousands of dollars you've stolen from my bank account? Veronica gasped. Marion, that's a terrible accusation to make in public. I'm not making accusations, Veronica. I'm stating facts. And the fact is, my son has been robbing me blind while pretending to help me. Now he wants my house so he can sell it and put me in a nursing home. Is that adult behavior to you? The restaurant was completely silent now. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye was on our table, and I realized that this was exactly where I needed to be, because if Darnell thought he could manipulate me in private, he was about to learn that I wasn't the same woman who'd raised him. Come on, Aaliyah, I said, taking her hand. We're leaving. But Grandma, she whispered, what about Daddy? I looked at my son across that table, and for the first time in his life, I saw him clearly. Not as the little boy who used to crawl into my bed when he had nightmares, but as the man who'd been planning my financial destruction for months. Daddy's going to have to figure out his own problems, I said, because I'm done solving them for him. I walked into that restaurant and announced to everyone that my son was a thief and a liar. The look on his face was priceless. But here's the thing about standing up for yourself, honey. Once you start, you can't stop. And once you realize how much power you actually have, there's no going back to being the person who lets other people walk all over you. I didn't sleep at all that night. Aaliyah stayed with me, curled up in my bed like she used to when she was little. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard those recordings playing in my head. My son's voice, so cold and calculating, planning my financial destruction like I was just another business deal. But you know what? I wasn't just angry. I was relieved. Because finally, after years of wondering why Darnell never seemed to care about my feelings, why he always had an excuse for why he couldn't help me, why he treated me like I was some kind of burden, I had the answer. He didn't care because he'd never cared. He'd been using me from the beginning. The next morning, I called my lawyer. Not Mr. Henderson, who'd been working with Darnell on the house transfer, but a different lawyer. A woman named Patricia Williams who specialized in elder abuse cases. I'd met her at a senior center event last year, and something told me I was going to need her services. Mrs. Thompson, she said when I explained what had happened. What you're describing is financial elder abuse. It's a crime. We need to document everything and file a police report. A police report against my own son. The words made me sick to my stomach, but I knew she was right. Because if Darnell was capable of stealing from me, he was capable of stealing from other elderly people too. And I wasn't going to let that happen. But first, I had to face him. Not in some fancy restaurant where he could control the situation, but on my own turf. In my own house, where I'd raised him. Where I'd made the rules. Where I was still the queen of my own castle. I called him that afternoon. Darnell, I need you to come over. We need to talk. Mama, I don't think that's a good idea. You were very upset yesterday, and I think we all need some time to cool off. Time to cool off. I laughed. Boy, you've had 30 years to cool off from being a decent human being, and it hasn't worked yet. You're coming over here, and you're bringing your wife. We're going to have this conversation like adults. He showed up 2 hours later, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Veronica was right behind him, wearing that fake smile she always puts on when she's trying to manipulate someone. Mama, Darnell said as soon as he walked through the door. I think there's been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I was sitting in my favorite chair, the one that had been in the family for 3 generations. Please, explain to me what I misunderstood. Did I misunderstand the part where you've been stealing money from my bank account for 8 months? Or did I misunderstand the part where you and your wife were planning to sell my house and put me in a nursing home? Veronica tried to interject. Marion, you're taking this all wrong. Darnell was just trying to help you manage your finances. You're getting older, and these things can be confusing. Confusing? I stood up, and I'm not a tall woman, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. Let me tell you what's confusing, Veronica. What's confusing is how a woman I welcomed into my family, a woman I taught to cook my grandmother's recipes, a woman I trusted with my grandchildren, could sit in my kitchen and plan my financial destruction while eating my food. Darnell's face was getting redder by the minute. Mama, you need to calm down. You're not thinking clearly. Oh, I'm thinking very clearly, I said. For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. And what I'm thinking is that my son is a thief and a liar, and his wife is a manipulative gold digger who's been using him to get to my money. That's when Darnell lost it. You ungrateful old woman. After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I've made, this is how you repay me. Sacrifices. I was shouting now, and I didn't care who heard me. What sacrifices? You've been living off me since you were 18 years old. Every time you had a financial problem, you came running to Mama. Every time you needed money, you came running to Mama. And now you want to take my house too? Well, it's not happening. Veronica tried to step between us. Marion, please. Let's all calm down and talk about this rationally. Rationally? I turned to her, and I think I scared her a little bit. You want to talk about being rational? How about we talk about the recording where you suggested that something should happen to me? How rational was that? Darnell's face went white. What recording? Aaliyah's recording. The one where you and your wife were planning my funeral while I was still alive. The one where you said you didn't need to do anything drastic because I was already sick and would probably die soon anyway. The silence that followed was deafening. Darnell looked like he'd been hit with a sledgehammer. Veronica was backing toward the door, like she was looking for an escape route.
Nana, Darnell said it.
I never said that. Oh, you said it, I said. And I have it on tape, along with all the other things you said. Like how you've been stealing money from me for months. Like how you were planning to sell my house immediately after I signed it over. Like how you were going to put me in a nursing home so you could pocket the money. I was crying now, but I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from rage. From the realization that the child I'd raised had become a monster, and I'd been too blind to see it. You know what the worst part is?
I said.
The worst part is that I believed you when you said you loved me. I believed you when you said you wanted to take care of me. I believed you when you said you were protecting me. But you were never protecting me. You were protecting yourself from having to work for a living. Darnell opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off.
No.
You don't get to say anything else. You don't get to make excuses. You don't get to blame me for your choices. You made your bed, and now you're going to lie in it. I walked to the door and opened it. Get out of my house. And don't come back until you're ready to apologize and return every penny you've stolen from me. Veronica was already halfway down the walkway, but Darnell stopped in the doorway. "Mama," he said, his voice shaking. "You're making a mistake." "No, Darnell," I said. "I'm fixing a mistake. The mistake I made when I trusted you with my heart and my money. That mistake ends today." The mysterious texter revealed something that made my blood boil. My son wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from his own children, too. 3 days after I kicked Darnell out of my house, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple but chilling. "Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street. I have information about your son that will shock you. A friend." I almost didn't go. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations about Darnell's betrayal. But curiosity got the better of me, and at 10 o'clock that morning, I found myself sitting across from Evelyn Johnson, my best friend of 40 years. Evelyn had been gathering evidence against Darnell for months. She'd suspected something was wrong when she noticed him driving a brand new BMW while claiming he was struggling financially. She'd started digging, and what she found made my blood run cold. "Marion," she said, sliding a folder across the table, "your son has been stealing from his own children's college funds." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were bank statements, withdrawal records, and transfer confirmations that showed Darnell had been systematically draining money from accounts set up for his kids' education.
Thousands of dollars gone.
Money that was supposed to secure their futures, spent on fancy cars and expensive vacations. "He's been taking money from Aaliyah's account too," Evelyn continued. "Every birthday check, every Christmas gift, every dollar you gave her for allowance, he's been taking it. That child has been saving for a new bicycle for 2 years, and every time she gets close to her goal, the money disappears." I felt sick, not just because of the theft, but because of the cruelty. Aaliyah was 8 years old. She trusted her father completely, and he'd been stealing her money right out from under her. But it got worse, much worse. "Remember when Simone's husband lost his job last year?" Evelyn asked. "And you helped them with their mortgage payments?" I nodded. Simone was my daughter, and when her husband was laid off, I'd given them $5,000 to help them keep their house. "Well, that money didn't come from your account," Evelyn said. "It came from Darnell, but he didn't give it to them. He took it from their children's college fund and told them it was a gift from you. So not only did he steal from his own kids, he made you look like the bad guy when you couldn't help them again." I was shaking with rage now. The depth of Darnell's manipulation was staggering. He'd been playing all of us against each other, stealing from everyone while making himself look like the generous one. "There's more," Evelyn said quietly. "He's been living a double life." She pulled out another set of documents, credit card statements, travel receipts, restaurant bills. Darnell had been spending money like water while telling everyone he was broke. Fancy dinners with Veronica, weekend trips to expensive resorts, designer clothes and jewelry, all paid for with money he'd stolen from his family. "He's been telling people that you're a burden," Evelyn continued, "that you're costing him money, that you're too old to take care of yourself. But the truth is, you've been his cash cow for years. Every time he needed money, he came to you. Every time he had a financial problem, he expected you to solve it. And when that wasn't enough, he started stealing from everyone else." I sat there in that coffee shop, surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal, and I realized something that made my heart break all over again. I hadn't just been robbed of my money. I'd been robbed of my family. Because if Darnell was capable of stealing from his own children, he was capable of anything. "I need to tell Simone," I said. "She needs to know what her brother has been doing." Evelyn nodded. "And the grandchildren. They need to know the truth about their father." But there was one more thing Evelyn had discovered, something that made my blood run cold. He's been planning this for years, she said. This isn't just about money, Marion. This is about control. He wants to control everything. The house, the money, even you. And if he can't control you, he'll destroy you. I thought about those recordings Aaliyah had made, about Darnell saying I was too old and confused and needed help. I thought about how he'd been trying to convince everyone that I was losing my mind, that I couldn't handle my own finances, that I needed him to take over. He's been gaslighting you, Evelyn said. Making you doubt yourself, making you think you're the problem. But you're not the problem, Marion. He is. I left that coffee shop with a folder full of evidence and a heart full of determination, because I realized that this wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. This was about protecting my family from a predator who'd been hiding in plain sight for years. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. When I showed my other children what their brother had been doing, their reaction shocked me more than the betrayal itself. I called an emergency family meeting that Sunday afternoon. Not just Simone and her husband, but all the grandchildren who were old enough to understand what was happening. I needed them to see the evidence for themselves, to understand the depth of Darnell's betrayal. The living room was packed. Simone and her husband, Marcus, sat on the couch looking worried. The grandchildren, Aaliyah, Marcus Jr., and little Tiana, were gathered around the coffee table, their faces serious and confused. Even my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had come over after I'd told her what was happening. I spread Evelyn's evidence across the coffee table like a detective presenting a case. Bank statements, credit card receipts, travel documents, everything that proved Darnell had been living a lie for years. Your father has been stealing from all of you, I said to the grandchildren. Every birthday check, every Christmas gift, every dollar you thought you were saving, he's been taking it. Aaliyah's face crumpled. But why, Grandma? Why would Daddy do that? Because he's not the person we thought he was, I said. He's been pretending to be a good father while stealing from his own children behind their backs. Simone was shaking with rage. I knew something was wrong with him. I've known for years, but I was too afraid to say anything. He's always been manipulative, always trying to turn people against each other. Marcus nodded. Remember when he told us that you couldn't help us with the mortgage because you were being selfish? He was the one who'd stolen the money from the kids' college fund, but he made it look like you were the problem. That's when I realized the full scope of Darnell's manipulation. He hadn't just been stealing from us. He'd been turning us against each other, making me look like the villain when I couldn't help financially, making Simone look ungrateful when she questioned his behavior, making everyone doubt their own perceptions of reality. But why didn't you say anything? I asked Simone. Because every time I tried to talk to you about him, you'd make excuses for him. You'd say he was just going through a hard time or that he didn't mean it. I thought you were choosing him over me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All these years, I'd been so focused on protecting Darnell that I'd been blind to how he was hurting everyone else. I'd been so desperate to believe he was still the little boy I'd raised that I'd ignored all the signs that he'd become someone else entirely. Grandma, Marcus Jr. said quietly, "What's going to happen to Daddy now?" I looked at that sweet boy's face, and I realized that he was asking the question that had been keeping me up at night. What was going to happen to Darnell? Was I going to press charges? Was I going to cut him out of the family completely? Was I going to destroy him the way he'd been trying to destroy me? I don't know, I said honestly. But I do know that we can't let him keep hurting people. We have to protect ourselves and each other. That's when the doorbell rang. Everyone froze. We all knew who it was. Darnell had been calling and texting for days, demanding to know why I'd been spreading lies about him. He'd been trying to get to the grandchildren, telling them that I was confused and making things up. And now he was here, probably thinking he could manipulate his way back into our lives. Should I answer it? Simone asked. I looked around the room at my family, my real family, the people who loved me and supported me and had never tried to hurt me. And I realized that I didn't have to face Darnell alone anymore. I had an army of people who were ready to stand with me. Yes, I said. Let him in. Let him see what he's done to this family. Simone opened the door, and Darnell walked in with that fake smile he always wore when he was trying to manipulate someone. But when he saw all of us sitting there with the evidence spread out on the table, his smile disappeared. Mama, he said, his voice shaking. What's going on here? This, I said, standing up and facing my son for what I knew would be the last time. This is what happens when you betray your family. This is what happens when you steal from your own children. This is what happens when you try to destroy the people who love you. Darnell looked at the evidence on the table, then at the faces of his family members, and I could see the moment he realized that his lies had finally caught up with him. Mama, he whispered, I can explain. No, I said. You can't, because there's no explanation for what you've done. There's no excuse for stealing from your own children. There's no justification for trying to destroy your own mother. I walked toward him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my own son. I wasn't afraid of his manipulation, his lies, or his threats. Because I finally understood that the power had always been mine. I'd just been too blind to see it.
You're done, Darnell, I said.
You're done stealing from us, you're done manipulating us, and you're done being part of this family. Get out of my house, and don't come back. My own son filed papers to take my granddaughter away from me, but he didn't know I had a secret weapon. The knock on my door came at exactly 9 o'clock on Monday morning. I was still in my robe, making coffee, when I heard the sharp rap that could only mean one thing: official business. I opened the door to find a young woman in a navy blue suit holding a manila envelope. Mrs. Marion Thompson? She asked, her voice crisp and professional. Yes, I said, though I already knew what was coming. I'm serving you with legal documents from the family court. Your son, Darnell Thompson, has filed for emergency custody of your granddaughter, Aaliyah Thompson. She handed me the envelope, and I felt my hands start to shake. Not from fear, but from rage. Darnell wasn't just trying to steal my money and my house. He was trying to steal my granddaughter too. On what grounds? I asked, my voice steady. He's claiming that you're endangering Aaliyah's welfare by exposing her to family drama and that you're mentally unstable and unfit to care for a child. The woman looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be delivering this message. There's also a hearing scheduled for this Friday at 2 o'clock. You'll need to appear in court. I thanked her and closed the door, then stood in my living room holding those papers and feeling like the world had just shifted beneath my feet. Darnell had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd gone from being a thief to being a monster. But here's the thing about monsters, honey. They always think they're smarter than everyone else. They always think they can manipulate their way out of any situation. And they always underestimate the people they're trying to destroy. I called Patricia Williams, the elder abuse lawyer, within minutes of receiving those papers. Mrs. Thompson, she said when I explained what had happened, this is a classic case of retaliation. Your son is trying to use the legal system to punish you for exposing his crimes. What do we do? I asked. We fight back, she said. And we fight dirty. Because if your son thinks he can use the courts to silence you, he's about to learn that he picked the wrong woman to mess with. Over the next 3 days, Patricia and I gathered evidence that would make Darnell's case look like a bad joke. We documented every theft, every lie, every manipulation. We got statements from the grandchildren about how their father had been stealing from them. We got bank records showing the money transfers. We got everything we needed to prove that Darnell was the one who was unfit to be around children. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. On Thursday night, Aaliyah came to me with her tablet again. This time, she had a recording she'd made just that afternoon when Darnell had come to their house to talk to her about the custody case. "Grandma," she said, her voice shaking, "Daddy said some really mean things about you. He said you're crazy and that you're going to die soon anyway, so I should come live with him and Mommy." I played the recording, and what I heard made my blood boil. Darnell had been trying to manipulate his own 8-year-old daughter, telling her that I was sick in the head and that she'd be better off with him. He'd been trying to turn her against me, using the same gaslighting tactics he'd used on me for years. But Aaliyah was smarter than her father gave her credit for. She'd recorded the entire conversation, and now we had proof that Darnell was not only a thief and a liar, but also emotionally abusive to his own child. The next day, I walked into that courtroom with my head held high and a folder full of evidence that would destroy my son's case. The judge was a stern-looking woman in her 50s who'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. She wasn't going to be fooled by Darnell's charm or Veronica's fake tears. "Mrs. Thompson," the judge said after reviewing the evidence, "your son has filed for emergency custody of your granddaughter, claiming that you're unfit to care for her. How do you respond?" "Your Honor," I said, standing up and facing the judge with all the dignity I could muster, "my son has been stealing from me for months. He's been stealing from his own children. And now he's trying to use the courts to punish me for exposing his crimes. I have evidence that he's emotionally abusive to his daughter and that he's been trying to manipulate her into turning against me." I handed the judge the folder with all our evidence. Bank statements, witness testimonies, and most importantly, Aaliyah's recording of her father trying to turn her against me. The judge listened to the recording, and I could see her face change as she heard Darnell's voice telling his daughter that I was crazy and going to die soon. When it was over, she looked at Darnell with an expression that could have frozen water. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Darnell stood up, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Your Honor, my mother is mentally unstable. She's been making false accusations against me for months. She's not fit to care for a child." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Thompson, I just listened to a recording of you telling your 8-year-old daughter that her grandmother is crazy and going to die soon. That's not the behavior of a parent who's concerned about his child's welfare. That's the behavior of someone who's trying to manipulate a child for his own purposes." She turned to me. "Mrs. Thompson, based on the evidence presented, I'm denying your son's request for custody. In fact, I'm going to recommend that the Department of Children and Family Services investigate whether your son should have unsupervised visitation with his daughter." Darnell's face went white. "Your Honor, you can't do that." "I can and I will," the judge said. "Mr. Thompson, you've been caught on tape trying to manipulate your own child. You've been caught stealing from your family. And you've been caught trying to use the legal system to punish your mother for exposing your crimes. You're lucky I'm not filing criminal charges against you right now." She banged her gavel. "Case dismissed. Mrs. Thompson, you may go home with your granddaughter." As I walked out of that courtroom with Aaliyah's hand in mine, I realized that I'd just won more than a legal victory. I'd won my freedom. I'd won my granddaughter's safety. And I'd won the knowledge that my son could never hurt us again. But Darnell wasn't done yet. As we walked to the parking lot, he came running after us, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Mama," he shouted. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'm going to make you pay for what you've done to me." I turned to face him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of my own son. "Bring it on, Darnell," I said. "Because I'm not the same woman you used to manipulate. I'm not the same woman who made excuses for you. I'm not the same woman who let you get away with everything. I'm the woman who's going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The judge's decision wasn't what I expected, but what happened next in that courtroom made me realize my son was capable of something I never imagined. The victory in court should have been the end of it. Darnell's custody case had been dismissed, his reputation was destroyed, and he'd been exposed as the thief and manipulator he really was. But here's the thing about people like Darnell: they don't know when to quit. They don't understand that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away. Instead, he doubled down. 2 days after the court hearing, I received a phone call from the police. Detective Martinez wanted to speak with me about my son. When I arrived at the station, I expected to be filing a report about the money he'd stolen from me. Instead, I found myself sitting across from a detective who had evidence that would change everything. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Martinez said, his voice serious, "we've been investigating your son for several weeks now. We have reason to believe he's been planning something much more serious than just stealing from you." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, bank records, and surveillance reports that made my blood run cold. "Your son has been researching nursing homes for months," the detective continued. "Not just any nursing homes, the cheapest ones, the ones with the worst reputations. Places where elderly patients are neglected and mistreated." I felt sick to my stomach. Darnell hadn't just been planning to steal my house and put me in a nursing home. He'd been planning to put me in a place where I'd be abused and forgotten. "But that's not the worst part," the detective said. "We've also discovered that he's been tampering with your medication." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Your son has been switching your heart medication with placebos. He's been trying to make your condition worse, so you'd be declared incompetent and he could take control of your finances legally." I sat there in that police station, surrounded by evidence of my son's betrayal, and I realized that I'd been living with a monster for years without knowing it. Darnell wasn't just a thief and a liar. He was someone who was willing to risk my life to get my money. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "At least 6 months," the detective said. "We found evidence that he's been ordering the fake pills online and switching them out when he came to visit you." I thought about all those times Darnell had brought me my medication, how he'd always insisted on organizing my pill bottles, how he'd been so concerned about my health. I'd thought he was being caring. Turns out he was trying to kill me. But why? I asked. Why would he do something like this? Because he knew that if you died, he'd inherit everything without having to trick you into signing it over. He was planning to let you die so he could get your house and your money without any legal complications. The room started spinning. I felt like I was going to pass out. My own son had been trying to murder me. Not quickly, not violently, but slowly and systematically, by denying me the medication that kept my heart beating. "Mrs. Thompson," the detective said gently, "we're going to arrest your son today. We have enough evidence to charge him with attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. But first, I need to know if you're willing to testify against him." I looked at that detective's face, and I saw the same expression I'd seen on the judge's face, the look of someone who'd seen the worst of humanity and was still shocked by what people were capable of doing to each other. "Yes," I said, "I'll testify. Because if my son is capable of trying to kill his own mother, he's capable of hurting anyone. And I'm not going to let that happen." That afternoon, the police arrested Darnell at his office. Veronica was arrested too, as an accomplice. They found the fake medication in their house, along with documents showing they'd been planning my death for months. But the most shocking discovery came from Aaliyah's tablet. She'd been recording everything, and in one of those recordings, we found Darnell and Veronica discussing what would happen if I didn't die from the medication. "If the pills don't work," Veronica had said, "we could always arrange an accident. Old people fall down stairs all the time." Darnell's response had been even more chilling. "We could make it look like she was confused and wandered into traffic." No one would question it. They'd been planning to murder me if the medication didn't work. They'd been discussing different ways to kill me, like I was just another problem to be solved. When the police played that recording for me, I felt something break inside me. Not sadness, not anger, but something else entirely. I felt free. Because finally, after years of wondering why my son treated me the way he did, I had the answer. He didn't love me. He'd never loved me. He'd been using me, manipulating me, and when that wasn't enough, he'd been trying to kill me. But he'd failed. I was still alive. I was still strong. And I was still fighting. My son thought he had destroyed me, but he didn't know I'd been planning my own revenge for months. The day after Darnell and Veronica were arrested, I called every single person in my neighborhood and invited them to my house for what I called a family meeting. But it wasn't really a family meeting, it was a trap. A trap that would expose Darnell's crimes to everyone who'd ever trusted him, everyone who'd ever believed his lies. By 6 o'clock that evening, my living room was packed. Neighbors, church members, family, friends, even people from the senior center, where I volunteered. They all came because they were worried about me, because they'd heard the rumors about what Darnell had done, and because they wanted to show their support. What they didn't know was that I'd been working with the police for weeks, gathering evidence, documenting everything. I'd been playing the role of the confused, helpless old woman while secretly building a case that would destroy my son's life. "Thank you all for coming," I said, standing in front of my fireplace with a folder full of evidence. "I know you've all heard the rumors about what's been happening in my family, and I wanted to set the record straight." I held up a photograph of Darnell and Veronica that the police had found in their house, a picture of them celebrating at a fancy restaurant, drinking expensive wine, while I was sitting at home alone, thinking they were struggling financially. "This is your son and his wife," I said to the shocked faces in my living room. This is what they were doing while they were telling everyone they couldn't afford to help me with my medical bills. This is what they were doing while they were stealing money from their own children's college funds. I passed around bank statements showing them money transfers, credit card receipts from expensive purchases, and travel documents from weekend trips they'd taken while claiming to be broke. "But that's not the worst part," I continued. "The worst part is what they were planning to do to me." I held up the fake medication bottles the police had found in their house, the ones they'd been using to replace my real heart medication. "They were trying to kill me," I said, my voice steady despite the gasps from the crowd. "They were switching my medication with placebos, hoping I'd die so they could inherit my house without having to trick me into signing it over." Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 30 years, stood up with tears in her eyes. "Marion, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I was ashamed," I said honestly. "I was ashamed that my own son could do something like this. I was ashamed that I'd raised someone who was capable of trying to kill his own mother. But I'm not ashamed anymore, because I finally understand that his choices aren't my responsibility." That's when the doorbell rang. Everyone turned to look as Detective Martinez and 2 uniformed officers walked into my living room. They were there to serve Darnell with additional charges: attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. But they were also there to show everyone in that room that I wasn't making this up, that I wasn't confused or mentally unstable, that I was telling the truth. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Martinez said, "we've completed our investigation, and we're filing additional charges against your son. The district attorney wants to speak with you about testifying at his trial." I looked around the room at all the shocked faces, at all the people who'd known Darnell since he was a little boy, at all the people who'd trusted him and believed in him. And I realized that this was exactly what I'd wanted. For everyone to see the truth about who he really was. "Detective," I said, "I'd be happy to testify. Because if my son is capable of trying to kill his own mother, he's capable of hurting anyone. And I'm not going to let that happen." The detective nodded and handed me a subpoena. The trial is scheduled for next month. We expect it to be a media circus, given the nature of the charges. A media circus? I asked. Mrs. Thompson, your son and his wife are facing attempted murder charges. This is going to be front-page news. Everyone in the city is going to know what they tried to do to you. I smiled for the first time in months. Good. Let everyone know. Let everyone see what happens when you try to destroy the people who love you. As the officers left, the room erupted in conversation. People were asking questions, sharing their own stories about Darnell's manipulation, expressing their shock and anger. But I wasn't listening to them. I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about the letter I'd received that morning, the one that had changed everything. It was from my late husband, written 20 years ago, right before he died. A letter I'd never known existed, hidden in a safety deposit box that Darnell had been trying to access for months. In that letter, my husband had warned me about our son. He'd seen the signs even then, the manipulation, the lies, the cruelty that Darnell tried to hide behind his charming smile. He'd written that letter to protect me, to warn me about the monster our son would become. But I'd been too blind to see it. Too desperate to believe that the little boy I'd raised was still there somewhere, buried under all the lies and manipulation. Now I finally understood. Darnell had never been the person I thought he was. He'd been a predator from the beginning, waiting for the right moment to strike. But his moment had passed, and now it was my turn. My son's final words to me were, "You'll regret this." But what happened next proved that sometimes karma comes faster than you think. The trial was everything Detective Martinez had promised, a media circus that made national headlines. Son attempts to murder mother for inheritance was splashed across newspapers and television screens for weeks. Reporters camped outside my house. Neighbors I'd never met were calling to offer their support, and strangers were sending me cards and letters from all over the country. But I wasn't interested in the attention. I was interested in justice. The day of the trial, I walked into that courtroom with my head held high and a heart full of determination. I wasn't the confused, helpless old woman Darnell had tried to make me into. I was a survivor, a fighter, and most importantly, I was a mother who was finally ready to protect her family from the monster she created. Darnell looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, like all the lies and manipulation had been stripped away to reveal the weak, pathetic man underneath. Veronica sat beside him, her face pale and drawn, looking like someone who'd finally realized that her plan had backfired spectacularly. The prosecutor called me to the stand first, and I told the jury everything. About the years of manipulation, the months of theft, the weeks of medication tampering, and the final, desperate attempt to murder me when everything else failed. Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor asked, how did you feel when you discovered that your own son was trying to kill you? I looked at Darnell across the courtroom, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for him. No love, no anger, no sadness. Just emptiness. I felt free, I said, because finally, after years of wondering why my son treated me the way he did, I had the answer. He didn't love me. He'd never loved me. He'd been using me, manipulating me, and when that wasn't enough, he'd been trying to kill me. But he'd failed. I was still alive. I was still strong. And I was still fighting. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts, attempted murder, elder abuse, and fraud. Darnell was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Veronica got 10 years as an accomplice. As the judge read the sentence, Darnell turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking.
I'm sorry.
"I never meant to hurt you. I love you." I stood up and faced my son for what I knew would be the last time. "No, Darnell, I said. You don't love me. You never loved me. Love doesn't try to kill the people it cares about. Love doesn't steal from them, manipulate them, or destroy them. What you felt for me wasn't love. It was greed. And now you're going to pay for it. I turned and walked out of that courtroom without looking back, because I was done with Darnell, done with his lies, done with his manipulation, and done with the person he'd become. But the story wasn't over yet, because as I was leaving the courthouse, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "my name is Sarah. I'm a social worker who specializes in elder abuse cases. Your story has inspired me to start a support group for other elderly people who are being manipulated by their families." She handed me a business card. "I'd love to have you come speak at our first meeting. There are so many people out there who are going through what you went through, and they need to know that they're not alone." I looked at that card, and I realized that my story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the other elderly people who were being abused by their families, all the other people who'd been made to feel helpless and alone. "Sarah," I said, "I'd be honored to help. Because if my story can help even one person escape from the kind of abuse I went through, then everything I've been through will have been worth it." That night, as I sat in my living room surrounded by my real family, Simone, Marcus, the grandchildren, and all the people who'd stood by me through everything, I realized that I'd finally found my purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was someone who could help other people survive too. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. One more person I needed to face. One more piece of my past that I needed to put to rest. And that person was coming to see me tomorrow. The letter was from my dead husband, and what he wrote 20 years ago finally explained why my son turned out to be a monster. The knock on my door came at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning. I knew who it was before I even opened it. The bank manager, Mr. Peterson, holding a small metal box and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice apologetic, "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. When we found this safety deposit box in your husband's name and discovered that your son had been trying to access it illegally, well, we knew we needed to get it to you immediately." He handed me the box, and I felt my hands start to shake. Not from fear this time, but from anticipation. Because I knew what was inside. The letter that would finally explain everything. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I sat down at my kitchen table and opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, addressed to me in my husband's familiar handwriting. I'd recognize that writing anywhere. The same handwriting that had written love notes to me for 30 years, the same handwriting that had signed birthday cards and anniversary letters. The date on the letter was 3 months before he died. 3 months before cancer took him from me, leaving me alone to raise our children. 3 months before I became the single mother who would work herself to exhaustion trying to give Darnell everything he needed. I opened the letter and began to read. "My dearest Marion, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're facing the challenges of raising our children alone. I know this will be the hardest thing you've ever done, but I also know that you're strong enough to handle it. There's something I need to tell you about Darnell. Something I've been afraid to say out loud. Something I've been hoping I was wrong about. But I can't stay silent anymore, not when you're going to be the one dealing with the consequences. Marion, our son, is not the person we think he is. He's been manipulating us for years, playing us against each other, using our love for him to get what he wants. I've seen him lie to teachers, steal from other children, and hurt animals when he thought no one was looking. I've tried to talk to him about it, try to get him help, but he's convinced that he's smarter than everyone else, that he doesn't need to follow the same rules as other people. He's convinced that the world owes him everything, and that he has the right to take whatever he wants. I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but to protect you. Because I know that when I'm gone, he's going to try to manipulate you the same way he's been manipulating me. He's going to use your love for him, your desire to be a good mother, against you. Marion, you have to be strong. You have to set boundaries. You have to remember that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. And most importantly, you have to remember that Darnell's choices are not your responsibility. You didn't make him the way he is. You didn't fail as a mother. You've been the best mother any child could ask for. But some people are born broken and no amount of love can fix them. I love you more than words can express, and I'm so sorry that I'm leaving you to deal with this alone. But I know you can handle it. I know you're strong enough to protect yourself and our other children from whatever Darnell becomes. Remember, my love, you are not responsible for his choices. You are only responsible for protecting yourself and the people who truly love you. Forever yours, James. I sat there at my kitchen table, holding that letter in my shaking hands, and I finally understood everything. My husband had seen the signs 20 years ago, had known what Darnell was capable of, had tried to warn me about the monster our son would become. But I'd been too blind to see it, too desperate to believe that the little boy I'd raised was still there somewhere, buried under all the lies and manipulation, too afraid to admit that my own son was beyond help. Now I finally understood. Darnell had never been the person I thought he was. He'd been a predator from the beginning, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment came, when I was vulnerable and alone, he'd struck with all the cruelty and calculation he'd been hiding for years. But he'd failed. I was still alive. I was still strong. And I was still fighting. And now I had the one thing I'd been missing all along, the knowledge that I wasn't responsible for what he'd become, that I hadn't failed as a mother, that I'd done everything I could to love and protect him, and his choices were his own. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then I picked up the phone and called Sarah, the social worker who'd approached me at the courthouse. "Sarah," I said when she answered, "I want to help you start that support group, because I finally understand that I'm not alone in this. There are other people out there who've been manipulated by their families, other people who've been made to feel like they're the problem when they're actually the victims." "That's wonderful, Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said. "We're having our first meeting next week. Would you like to come speak?" "I'd be honored," I said, "because if my story can help even one person escape from the kind of abuse I went through, then everything I've been through will have been worth it." I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen, at the home I'd built with my own hands, at the life I'd created despite everything that had happened. And I realized that I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was someone who could help other people survive too. But there was still one more thing I needed to do. One more person I needed to face. One more piece of my past that I needed to put to rest. And that person was coming to see me tomorrow. My son wrote me from prison, begging for forgiveness, but what he asked for proved he hadn't changed at all. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after Darnell had been sentenced to prison. I recognized his handwriting immediately, the same neat, careful script he'd used to write thank you notes and birthday cards when he was younger. But this letter wasn't a thank you note. It was something else entirely. "Mama," the letter began, "I know you're probably angry with me, and I understand why. I made some mistakes, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. But I want you to know that I love you, and I always have." I almost laughed out loud. After everything that had happened, after all the lies and manipulation, after the attempted murder, he was still trying to gaslight me. Still trying to convince me that his crimes were just mistakes, and that his love for me was real. But it was what came next that made me realize he hadn't changed at all. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I think I understand why you're so upset. You've always been protective of me, and when you saw me struggling financially, You probably felt like you needed to help me. But Mama, you have to understand that I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to protect you from making bad financial decisions. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before I could believe what I was seeing. Even from prison, even after being convicted of attempted murder, Darnell was still trying to manipulate me. Still trying to convince me that his crimes were actually acts of love, that he'd been trying to protect me from my own bad decisions. But it got worse. I know you're probably thinking about changing your will, and I want you to know that I understand. But Mama, you have to think about the grandchildren. They're going to need someone to take care of them when you're gone, and I'm still their father. I still love them, and I still want what's best for them. He was trying to use the grandchildren against me, trying to manipulate me into thinking that cutting him out of my will would hurt the children, when the truth was that keeping him in their lives would be the worst thing I could do to them. But the most insulting part came at the end. I know you're probably feeling guilty about what happened, and I want you to know that you don't need to. You didn't do anything wrong, Mama. You were just trying to be a good mother. But now it's time to move forward. It's time to forgive and forget, and to remember that we're still family. Forgive and forget. After everything he'd done to me, after all the lies and manipulation, after the attempted murder, he was asking me to forgive and forget, as if his crimes were just a misunderstanding that we could put behind us. I folded the letter and put it in the trash. Because I was done with Darnell's manipulation, done with his lies, done with his attempts to make me feel guilty for his choices, and done with the person he'd become. But I wasn't done with the lesson he'd taught me. That afternoon, I called Sarah and told her about the letter. This is exactly what I want to talk about at the support group meeting, I said. Because this is how manipulators work. They never take responsibility for their actions. They never admit that they're wrong. They just keep trying to manipulate you, even from prison. That's a powerful message, Mrs. Thompson, Sarah said. A lot of people in our group have received similar letters from family members who've abused them. They're always asking for forgiveness, but they're never actually sorry for what they did. Exactly, I said. And that's why I'm going to speak at your meeting. Because people need to know that they don't have to forgive their abusers. They don't have to feel guilty for protecting themselves. And they don't have to let family members continue to manipulate them, even from prison. The support group meeting was scheduled for the following week, and I was nervous about speaking in front of a room full of strangers. But I was also excited, because for the first time in my life, I was going to use my story to help other people. I was going to turn my pain into purpose. But first, I had one more thing to do. One more person I needed to face. One more piece of my past that I needed to put to rest. And that person was coming to see me tomorrow. The woman who showed up at my door changed everything. She was the reason I finally found my voice and my strength. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. I'd been expecting this visit for weeks, ever since I'd received the letter from the prison. But I still wasn't sure I was ready for it. I opened the door to find a woman in her 50s standing on my porch, her face lined with the same kind of pain I'd been carrying for months. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. "Mrs. Thompson?" she said, her voice hesitant. "My name is Evelyn Johnson. I'm Darnell's mother-in-law." I felt my heart skip a beat. This was Veronica's mother, the woman who'd raised the manipulative gold digger who'd helped Darnell try to destroy me. What was she doing here? "Mrs. Johnson," I said, stepping back to let her in. "Please come in." She followed me into the living room and sat down on the couch, her hands shaking as she held her purse. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to apologize for what my daughter did to you. I had no idea she was capable of such cruelty." I sat down across from her, not sure what to say. "Mrs. Johnson, you don't need to apologize for Veronica's choices. They're not your responsibility." "That's what I've been trying to tell myself," she said, tears in her eyes. But the truth is, I should have seen the signs. Veronica has always been manipulative, always been focused on money and status. I tried to talk to her about it, tried to get her help, but she convinced me that I was the problem, that I was being too critical of her. I felt a chill run down my spine. This woman was describing the same kind of manipulation I'd experienced with Darnell. The same gaslighting, the same attempts to make her doubt her own perceptions. Mrs. Johnson, I said gently, you're not alone in this. What you're describing is exactly what I went through with Darnell. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the attempts to make you feel like you're the problem when you're actually the victim. She looked at me with surprise. You mean you experienced the same thing? Exactly the same thing, I said. And that's why I'm starting a support group for people who've been manipulated by their families. Because we're not alone. There are thousands of people out there who've been through what we've been through, and they need to know that they're not crazy, they're not the problem, and they're not alone. Mrs. Johnson's face lit up. A support group? That's exactly what I need. I've been feeling so isolated, so ashamed, like I failed as a mother because my daughter turned out to be a monster. You didn't fail as a mother, I said firmly. Just like I didn't fail as a mother. Our children's choices are not our responsibility. We did everything we could to love and protect them, and their choices are their own. We talked for hours that afternoon, sharing our stories, our pain, and our hope for the future. By the time Mrs. Johnson left, I knew that I'd found my calling. Not just to help other people who'd been manipulated by their families, but to create a community of survivors who could support each other and heal together. The next week, I stood in front of a room full of strangers and told my story. I talked about the years of manipulation, the months of theft, the weeks of medication tampering, and the final, desperate attempt to murder me when everything else failed. But I also talked about the healing, about how I'd learned to set boundaries, about how I'd learned to protect myself, and about how I'd learned that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. When you're being manipulated by family, I said to the room full of tearful faces, it's easy to feel like you're the problem. It's easy to believe that if you were just a better mother, a better father, a better person, your family member wouldn't treat you this way. But that's not true. You are not the problem. You are not responsible for their choices. And you have the right to protect yourself, even from the people you love. The room erupted in applause, and I realized that I'd finally found my voice. Not just the voice that could tell my story, but the voice that could help other people find their strength. After the meeting, Sarah approached me with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Thompson, that was incredible. You've given these people hope. You've shown them that they can survive, that they can heal, and that they can find their voice too. I didn't just give them hope, I said. I gave myself hope, because I realized that my story isn't just about me anymore. It's about all the other people who've been manipulated by their families, all the other people who've been made to feel helpless and alone. That night, as I sat in my living room surrounded by the people who truly loved me, Simone, Marcus, the grandchildren, and all the friends who'd stood by me through everything, I realized that I'd finally found my purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was someone who could help other people survive too. The next morning, I received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a television producer who'd heard about my story and wanted to make a documentary about elder abuse and family manipulation. Mrs. Thompson, he said, your story is exactly what we need to raise awareness about this issue. There are thousands of elderly people being abused by their families every year, and most of them don't know where to turn for help. I thought about all the people I'd met at the support group, all the stories I'd heard, all the pain and suffering that could be prevented if people just knew the signs of manipulation and abuse. Yes, I said. I'll do the documentary. Because if my story can help even one person escape from the kind of abuse I went through, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. 6 months later, the documentary aired on national television. It was called Gran's Voice: Surviving Family Betrayal, and it told not just my story, but the stories of dozens of other elderly people who'd been manipulated by their families. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people called the hotline we'd set up, hundreds of support groups were started across the country, and laws were changed to better protect elderly people from financial abuse. But the most important thing that happened was that I finally found my voice. The voice that could tell my story, the voice that could help other people, and the voice that could say loud and clear that no one has the right to manipulate or abuse you, not even family. Today, I run a national organization called Gran's Voice that helps elderly people recognize and escape from family manipulation. We have chapters in every state, we've helped thousands of people, and we've saved countless lives. But more than that, we've given people hope. Hope that they can survive, hope that they can heal, and hope that they can find their voice too. Because here's the thing about finding your voice, honey. Once you find it, you can't lose it. Once you realize that you have the right to protect yourself, that you have the right to set boundaries, and that you have the right to say no to people who want to hurt you, there's no going back. You become unstoppable. And that's exactly what I am now. Unstoppable.